Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading, talk about any bookish things that have happened, and any things that happen in the world as they come up. There was a big one this week. We'll get to it in a little bit. There are a couple of things I wanted to cover quickly before we get into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. I did finish 2 books this week and I am currently reading 2 others. We'll get to that in a little bit. The big bookish news that happened this week is, of course, the shortlist for the Booker Prize. I did a reaction video. I will post it down below if you haven't seen it or if you haven't gotten bored of watching reaction videos to that yet. It is interesting what happens as you work through a long list and a short list on your way to announcing the winner of a prize like the Booker. You don't get anything like that with the Pulitzer, since there is no long list, there's no short list, there's just an announcement. And I think that's why I really like following along with the Booker and the Women's Prize and the National Book Award, even though I don't consider myself to be an expert on them and I don't follow them anywhere near as closely, as in, like, I'm not a person who's going to say, I'm going to read the whole long list, I'm going to read the whole short list, like I am with the Pulitzer winner. But it's interesting to follow along because I think, at least on my reaction video for the long list, at that time, people were mostly excited that Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan had made the list, and The Colony by Audrey McGee had made the list, and that was kind of it. And then since then, a lot of people have read the long list and worked their way through it. So now that we have gotten to the short list, it felt like a lot of the excitement actually centers around The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida. A lot of people have read that book in recent weeks and were really excited that it made it onto the shortlist, and they said that that is actually the book that they would like to see win. And that is a really interesting shift in the conversation that has come necessarily from people reading the books on the long list. And I think that's why it's interesting to follow this conversation as it works toward announcing the winner. And yeah, I just think that's really been interesting. And I'm interested in reading Seven Moons, but I don't plan to rush into it anytime soon. It's just interesting how the conversation shifts. And ultimately, The Colony did not make it to the shortlist, but it almost seems like most people don't quite miss it because of the quality of the other books on the list. And that's been interesting to follow. The National Book Award will be announcing its long list next week. I'm not going to do a prediction for it. I'm kind of almost going to do a prediction for it, but that'll be next week. I have a video in mind for that hopefully I will be able to film today and schedule for Monday. We'll see how that goes. But that was the big bookish news that happened this week. Obviously, the big news in the world is that Queen Elizabeth II died yesterday, and I'm very much an American. I don't pay very close attention to the royal family and updates about it, and I don't know a whole lot about the way the British political system works. I know that she is kind of like a figurehead or has a sort of constitutional role. So I don't feel like the person who should really be expressing opinions, but I did want to bring it up because it's a big thing that happened, and it does feel weird, even as someone who is not British and has not closely followed the royal family for a very long time, because she has been the queen for my entire lifetime. And I'm willing to bet that that is the case for a lot of people who are watching this video, because she has been the queen for so long. And not only that, she has been a huge figure in politics and in the media and just in the world, or at least the Western world in general, during that whole period. In my lifetime, pretty much every other political figure or world figure has had a rise and fall. Best case scenario, they have retired to a private life and are no longer in the spotlight. But she has been there consistently every year. It's weird to think about her not being there. So even as somebody who has a very distant relationship with the royal family, it's just odd to think about the shift. There's a sense of consistency that is now gone. And I think with the turmoil and shifts in the political system in the UK, I wouldn't blame anyone for feeling uncertain about the direction of the future. And because this means a big shift for the royal family, it also means a shift for politics, because now we have King Charles, and he is not anywhere near as popular as Queen Elizabeth was. And he is also 73 years old, so we're definitely not going to get the long sustained, I guess reign is the wrong word, but I don't know what else to say, that we had with Elizabeth. So there will probably be another change in the not too distant future. So there's that sense of uncertainty again. And I've seen a lot of people try sort of shaming other people for being sad or uncertain about how to feel about this. And I guess I just wanted to say, like, of course, there are definitely problematic things about British politics and colonialism and the continued role of the royal family. Those are conversations that we should be having. But it's not wrong for someone to feel off in the wake of this happening. And again, if you had any sense of consistency or comfort from the existence of Queen Elizabeth, that's okay. Like, we should have those conversations. But at the end of the day, a person died. And I think about my grandmother, who was the same age as Queen Elizabeth, actually, maybe off by a few years. And she died last year, my grandmother. And I think about her lifetime and all the changes that she went through. Like when she grew up, it was completely unacceptable for her to marry someone who was not Italian. So she had an arranged marriage with a man back in Italy. And they tried to do the same for my mother. And it was scandalous that my mother did not go along with that. So there have been great shifts in the world in Queen Elizabeth's lifetime. And I saw those reflected in my grandmother's life. It's not the same situation by any stretch, but it is interesting to think about. So that's all I'm going to say about that. The other thing I want to mention before we get into the Friday Reads portion of this video is that obviously you can see I've been filming from this spot a lot lately. So I guess I work from here. Again, I had been moving back into the office after we lost Guinness. And it's funny. It's not funny. It's actually kind of sad. Guinness used to get up with me in the morning. And while I was getting ready to start my workday, he would sit with me while I was getting ready. And then he would run out here and wait for me on the couch. And Jamie has randomly started doing that. Not every day, but a bunch of days lately. So by the time I come out here to make coffee and get ready, she's sitting on the couch and waiting for me. And I can't say no to that. So she's not here right now. She left right before I started filming this video. But yeah, I guess I work from here again because I'm a sucker and I'm going to ruin my back doing this. But, for now, it feels good. I had mentioned last week that I was having a bit of a rough week again. Things just kind of come in waves, especially since we lost Guinness. There have also been things with our foster son out in the world. And last week was a difficult week for that. And this week has kind of continued that. That's why I've made really slow progress in my reading this week. But I had an appointment with a therapist on Wednesday, and I think that's going to be a good thing for me. And I'm not going to get into it, obviously, but I thought it was worth bringing up because people have commented on videos since we lost Guinness to say that they really appreciate me being open about going through like the grief process and all that, because I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. And I think mental health is also something a lot of people can relate to and struggle with, especially over the last few years. The future is uncertain. Climate change and alone, and the politics has been a lot. So just on a political level, a lot has happened. And then personally, a lot of stuff happens in the world. And I think it's important to reach for help when you need it, if you can, because I am fully aware that therapy is not something that is accessible to a lot of people. I think it's going to be good for me. And sometimes, another reason I want to bring it up is that sometimes you don't necessarily realize when you would benefit from something like this. Like I made the appointment because Joel and I were talking about everything that's happened, and he said to me, maybe it would be good for you to talk to someone. And the second he did, it was like, oh my God, you're right. It hadn't occurred to me. But he was right. And I think it's important for a lot of people to sometimes get that context. Somebody from the outside saying, like, sometimes it's okay to talk to someone. And because otherwise it just wouldn't have occurred to me and I would have continued. And I think it's going to be very helpful for me. So I'm glad that I did that. And that will be a thing. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about it much going forward because that's going to be a very personal journey. But I did want to mention it now because I think it's going to be good for me. And you have to prioritize your own mental health and your emotional capacity, in part at least, because it will help you continue to engage with things that you enjoy with. Like last week, I kind of struggled responding to comments. I fell wildly behind in responding to comments on videos last week. Didn't feel like posting a video, but forced myself to do it and didn't get a whole lot of reading done, or at least not as much as I wanted to originally. Here's Jamie again, coming back to hang out with me. And the same has kind of been true this week. I fell behind on comments again. I haven't gotten as much reading as I would like done. And I want to get back to a place where I can engage with the things that I like. Let me move the camera a little bit so you can see Jamie. I know a lot of people said that they liked watching her in last week's Friday Reads video. So that's all I will say about that. A cat across the street just caught a butterfly. Sorry if I'm distracted. The final thing I want to mention before we get into the Friday Reads portion of this video is that this morning I watched a video. I'm not going to mention the BookTube channel, but I watched a video where somebody was complaining about a comment that they had gotten that pointed out they only had one female author in their favorite books list. And they got very defensive about their right to like books by male authors. And to be clear, a person has the right to like what they like. And if that means books by male authors, then, do you. That's fine. But a quick look at this person's videos reveals that they pretty exclusively read books by men. And the only reason I want to bring it up now, because I'm not trying to subtweet anyone, except that I kind of am. I don't know if this person watches my videos at all, so they probably don't even know and won't see this. But the reason I want to bring it up is that, yes, they have a right to like what they like. They don't have to change their favorite books list to appease someone else. The problem I have with this is that they seem to think that a book by a female author would only land on their favorite books list if they gamed the system and intentionally put books by female authors on the list to appease a sense of political correctness so people can't really comment on their list and point out things like this. But in reality, if they read more books by female authors, more female authors might end up on their favorite books list. And again, it's fine if they don't want to read books by women. I don't get it, but it's fine if that's their decision. But the thought that a book by a female author would only end up on the system if they gamed the system or cheated kind of bothered me. So just wanted to throw that out there into the universe. Again, it means kind of nothing, but I think it's an important thing to think about. And personally, I try to read broadly and read more about other books and cultures and backgrounds from mine, other races, other genders, and sexualities. I think that's important. Not everybody does, and that's fine. But if that's not the way you read, then you have to acknowledge the gap and don't think that the only way other backgrounds would end up on the list is if you cheated. That's all. So let's move into the Friday Reads portion. I completely forgot to mention that I finished The Last Unicorn last week. I mentioned that I watched the movie, but I had forgotten that I actually finished it in the week leading up to my last Friday Reads video. So I really liked this book. It's on my top 10. I really need to work on my top 10 books of the year because it's gotten extremely competitive and I need to have a sit down, work through it, and figure out what goes where because it's a lot. And I really enjoyed this book. I did start having a conversation with my niece this week. We had one FaceTime where we talked about it. It's hard to get a 13-year-old to focus. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. So we ended up talking about going back to school and things like that a lot, more than we talked about the actual book. But that's fine. She had some really good thoughts about the book. She loves the unicorn character and the description. She also loved the different ways of describing the color of the unicorn. Again, in the very first paragraph of the book, you get, she was no longer the careless color of sea foam, but rather the color of snow falling on a moonlit night. Beautiful description. And I think once, she hasn't finished the book yet, and she actually started back in school yesterday. So it's fine. She's not going to be in trouble with school, but it'll be nice to have a continued conversation with her about it. But I just wanted to mention that because I forgot to talk about how I finished the book last week. So I did not actually finish that book this week. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned it in a Friday Reads. And I think you could probably gather from my last Friday Reads that I had finished it, but all I talked about was the movie. A book I did finish this week is Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. I picked this up on Saturday or Sunday and read it in a single afternoon. This continues to be a really adorable series, and that was everything that I wanted because, again, I had a tough week mentally and emotionally last week, and I really needed the sort of pick-me-up that this represented. And one thing about it is that, dark or difficult things happen in here, and it's interesting because it allows the relationship between Charlie and Nick to be complicated in interesting ways. My only real problem with the series is that it continues to feel like watching a single episode of a TV season. And I want individual chapters of a book, or not chapters, individual sections of a series to have a beginning and an end. I want there to be kind of more of a conclusion instead of like you have to go on to the next book like immediately, like that sense of watching a single episode of a season of television. And I really like the book. I'm going to be fine moving on to Volume 4, but I do wish they were more contained in a way. But that's my weird bugaboo. I really enjoyed this, and I will definitely move on to Volume 4. I'll do Volume 5 whenever it is available. But just that one little note about it. I finished Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. This was a bit of a challenging read, given, again, the fact that I was having a rough time mentally and emotionally this week and last week, especially last week. I loved this a lot. I will say I haven't responded to the comment because, again, I fell wildly behind on comments this week, but somebody had said that they thought this was light YA, and I will say I disagree with that on 2 counts. One, because I don't think this book is lightweight at all. And 2, I kind of object to the use of YA as an insult, but that's a whole other thing. And I didn't agree with the fact that they talked about Leila Mottley's feeling inauthentic to the story because she grew up in Oakland, and, this is kind of based on news articles that she read when she was only 17 years old. She is 20 years old now. I thought it was very authentic. So just wanted to mention that to kind of counteract that comment. This is a difficult book, again, because the things that happen to the protagonist, Kiara, are really difficult. She is living in an apartment with her brother. There have been traumas in their family. They don't have parents in their lives. Their father died, and their mother had gone to prison and is just out of their lives, essentially. And her brother is older than her and had just turned 18 when their mother exited their lives. So he is supposed to be her guardian, but he has lost his ability to really process the trauma that they've been through, and he is going off and pursuing a music career, and that's it. He's not doing anything to help them stay in their apartment. Kiara has dropped out of school. She has managed to barely make the rent, but now their rent is going up and she can't afford it anymore. She turns to walking the streets or night crawling and quickly falls into the trap of the Oakland Police Department. They capture her and begin abusing her systemically over time. And they will make threats to her. For instance, if they invite her to a party and she says she can't go, they say, well, if you don't come, we're going to arrest you. So she doesn't really have a choice. And that question of choice is really played with a lot because other characters will look at her and be like, you had a choice. You didn't have to do this. And no, she didn't. But what else was she going to do at a certain point? Well, what were her really good other options? So it plays with that sort of sense of expectation that people have of like, you didn't have to do this, but nobody else is going to pay her rent. So it's an interesting conversation that kind of goes on in the background of this book. It's a little bit bleak. It's a lot bleak. It's a lot brutal, but it's a beautiful book nonetheless. And I think it's an essential book. I'm very sad it did not make the shortlist for the Booker Prize. I hope it is picked up by either the National Book Award or the Pulitzer Prize next year. We'll see. And I'll be talking more about that next week. But I think it's a fantastic book. I'm glad that I read it. It is difficult for sure, but I'm glad that I read it and worked my way through it. I think it's pretty beautifully written and observed as well. So I would definitely recommend it if you can stomach a lot of difficult topics in a book. I talked about American War by Omar Akkad last week and how I thought I was going to be DNFing it, and I did. I was feeling really stressed out by the idea of a book about a second American Civil War, and between this and that, it was too much heavy going on, and I was really liking this and decided to stick with that and drop the idea of a second American Civil War because that feels a little... can't think about it. So I did DNF American War. Not because it's bad, just because for my own mental health, I had to put it to the side. Maybe at some point I will revisit it, but not this year. So it's not that it's a bad book at all. It's actually really well written in the part of it that I did read. Just was not a book for me to read now. That brings us to what I am currently reading. I started the audio of The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I was so excited for it. I actually have a copy of the book on its way to me. I had pre-ordered it at Montana Book Company, and they have it in the mail. Mail has been slow this week because usually when they send me something, it's here by now, but it's not, and that's fine. I had always thought once I finished Hamnet that the audio of that book would probably be amazing. So I was curious by the audio of The Marriage Portrait, and I started it that way. I am, I think, 48% of the way through, and I'm loving this book. It is beautiful, every bit as beautiful as Hamnet, and I am really enjoying it and looking forward to where it goes. It is interesting because when this book was announced back in February, I did a reaction video about the plot of it, and I linked to a page that had more information about the book. And there was at least one person who was a little upset that the description of the book has a spoiler, and I disagree with it being a spoiler because Lucrezia de Medici lived a very long time ago. Obviously, she is not alive now. The details of her life are largely known. The book kind of deals with an essential mystery about her life and speculates on how it might have gone. But to me, it's not really a spoiler. And I would say don't think of her life as a spoiler, or like the facts of her life as a spoiler, because when you begin this book, it starts dealing with them right away. Like what happens to her in life is the central question of the book. It's what it's dealing with. So the very first chapter introduces that. So don't think of it as a spoiler. Just like with Hamnet, the fact that you know Hamnet is going to die is not the point of the book. It's more about everything that's going on around it and what it means for the life of Agnes, this woman who has been a shadow figure in history, and giving her life and her story back to her. And that's kind of exactly what's happening in The Marriage Portrait. And Maggie O'Farrell is so good at this. And she has such an eye for beautiful detail. The way she describes things is just sumptuous. And I could listen to it all day, which I kind of have been since I've been listening to the audio. So since the book really heavily deals with this, I am going to talk a little bit about what the book is about. If you don't want to know what the book is about, maybe skip ahead to the next book, because I'm not done with this one, so I don't really have full thoughts on it anyway. So Lucrezia de Medici was married young. In the beginning of the book, she goes to a secluded location with her husband and becomes convinced that he is going to try to murder her. And the book really is centered on that. It moves back in time to tell the story of her childhood and the engagement, and then we'll come back to the present and talk about what happens when they get to this secluded area. And it is really beautifully observed. She is an interesting character. I don't want to say she's like Agnes in Hamnet. In a way, she is a sort of not stereotypically feminine character for the time. Her sister and her mother feel much more attuned to the life of a woman and what was expected of them. She has her own pursuits and interests, but not in the way of Agnes. Agnes was much more stronger about pursuing them, and Lucrezia feels like she is a bit adrift in her expectations and the things that people want and expect of her. And she feels sort of lost once she's not even an adult. That's the thing. Like, she's a teenager. So you wouldn't expect her to have a really profound understanding of the world. And yet she is in these circumstances where it feels like that is what she needs. And it's interesting as well because the book doesn't really give you a sense of what's happening in the world and in the politics. It's all very mysterious for her, which is exactly the way it would be. She would not know what's going on in the realm in which her husband, the Duke of Ferrara, controls. And she would not know what's going on with him. She would have a very small sphere in which she lives and exists, and all of those external forces would kind of come up on her suddenly. And it leaves her unmoored and uncertain, and I think Maggie O'Farrell uses that to really great effect. She's a fantastic writer. This book is beautiful, but it's a really great book, and I look forward to finishing it. I am, I think, 48% of the way through the audio. So, yeah, you know what's going to happen to her. The question of the book is sort of how we get there and what her life was like. And it's a bit of giving her agency back to her. She is a shadowy figure in the past that we don't know a lot about, just like William Shakespeare's wife. And in Hamnet, Maggie O'Farrell really put the focus on her and sort of gave her agency and justice back, because traditionally people think of William Shakespeare's wife as this unlikable figure who he didn't really love. And Maggie O'Farrell makes her a much more complicated figure and allows her to be someone that you sympathize with and empathize with and want to see good things about. And she's doing pretty much the same thing for Lucrezia in this book. It's really good. I am enjoying it a lot. The physical book I'm reading is now in November by Josephine Johnson. I am reading my Franklin Library edition of it. I hadn't thought about this when I started collecting these, but when I hold this book, I get a little nervous about rubbing off the guilt on it. This book was also just re-released in paperback recently, because that is why I wanted to do this next for my Pulitzer Prize project, because Josephine Johnson is an author that a lot of people are reevaluating now and looking back at and appreciating more. Kim from Middle of the Bookmark actually just read this. I think she posted her review of it already. I haven't watched it yet. I might wait until I'm done with this, which is interesting because I just had that conversation about, do you read reviews? And I feel like in this case, because it's for my Pulitzer Prize project, I might hold off. But I'm really enjoying this book so far. I'm really not far in at all. I am 19 pages, but I've taken a lot of notes already. And the writing is beautiful and really well observed. She was only, I think, 24 or 25 when this book was published. It was the Pulitzer winner for 1935, I want to say. Yes, 1935. So it was published in 1934. And she is the youngest Pulitzer Prize winner ever. But her writing career kind of fizzled out after that. And there have been a lot of discussion about why that happened. And it's going to be interesting to pursue that conversation. Really liking this so far. And I hope that that reading experience of the first 19 pages continues all the way through, and that there will be a lot to talk about once I finish the book. So that is what I'm currently working on, and I think that covers it for this Friday Reads video. I will leave it at that. I would love to hear what you've been up to, what you've been reading, your thoughts about any of the things that I have talked about in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.